Hello everybody. Today we're going to be showing you how you can build your own custom gaming PC. A lot of people out there are getting Xbox Ones, PS4s, all these other consoles that cost $300, $400, $500 depending on the packages you're getting. We're going to show you how you can spend somewhere around $600 to about $800 and build yourself a really competitive gaming machine, something that can actually power the most modern titles, have way better fidelity in their graphics processing than what you're going to get from these consoles, these current generation consoles out there. We're going to be analyzing some of the price difference between a lot of the consoles out there and obviously getting a PC like this. And again, this is going to be an entry-level budget build. Most importantly, we're going to be showing you how you can actually build your own computer. Now, the great thing with building a computer is that it doesn't matter if it's $2,000 or it's $400. The same parts are going in the computer. You just have to know what's compatible. So we're going to show you guys how you can put those parts together, how you can assemble them properly in the actual case, and get the performance that you need out of the computer you're looking at. All right, so let's jump right in and talk about what you're actually going to need to build yourself your own computer from scratch. Now, obviously, there's a lot of different parts here. It can seem very overwhelming, but we're going to break it down. It's really not that complicated. It seems harder than it is. So first and foremost, most of you probably have somewhere lying around in your house or in a garage or in a box somewhere a decent mouse. This is a really old Logitech one that's kind of a piece of junk, but it works. And you probably have yourself an old keyboard that you can use. It doesn't matter how old it is. Most of them are going to work. Additionally, you'll need to have yourself with a monitor, something that you probably want to have an LCD screen. CRTs are really old and they kind of stink now. But if that's all you have, that's fine too. Or you can go and buy yourself a new one for $100, $150, or you can watch some of our videos. If you want a more premium one, you can get yourself something around $300 or $600 that can be really, really excellent. Let's talk about the parts, the essentials needed to build any computer, not just the computer we're building. You need to have a case, first and foremost. This is going to house your computer. This is going to be the centerpiece of it. It's going to be the only aesthetic that's really going to be seen of the computer. Obviously, you can see some internals if it has a window or a vented cover like this. But typically, you want your case to look nice as well as cool well. Keep your case and everything inside of it cooled and nice low temperature so you don't overheat. You'll need to have a processor. Right here we have the i5. This is the newest generation i5 4690K. This is an LGA 1150 socket. I'll explain what that means a little bit later. Basically, this is one of the nicest processors you can buy right now in the consumer field. It's great because it's actually not that expensive either. You can find it for in the ballpark of $200 right now. So really a really good value for this i5 processor. Next up, we have our motherboard. You need to have your motherboard matching the socket of your processor. Now, that's a really complicated thing, right? No, it's not that hard. Go to PC Part Picker. It's a website. We'll include the link in the description. You can easily match whatever socket of processor with the compatible motherboards right there on their website. Now, we're using an H97M Anniversary Edition from ASRock, or ASRock. I don't know how to say it, but I always call them ASRock. And typically, when you're getting a motherboard, you want it to be able to match the capabilities of the processor. This is an overclockable processor. It's a K series, means it can be overclocked from Intel. Now, this motherboard is not going to support overclocking, not out of the box anyway. There are some tweaks you can do, and there's some things you can work around to actually get an overclock out. But we're not too concerned about that because the unlocked model, the overclockable one, is actually cheaper than the non-overclockable one. So we're going to focus on that. Next thing you'll need an operating system. We're going to run Windows 8.1. I don't care if you like it or not. It's a great operating system. It's a lot faster than all the previous versions of Windows, and they've done a lot to make it actually really well catered to desktop users. You'll need to have a power supply, something that's going to actually run power from the wall, transform it into a usable power for your processor, your motherboard, your graphic card, all the other things in your computer. This is the Corsair CX430M. It's a modular power supply. It's what they call semi-modular because it's not a truly modular power supply. Doesn't matter. What it's going to do is it's going to keep a lot of the extra cables out of the way. It's a really nice power supply. Corsair makes great products as far as that's concerned. I wouldn't skimp out on your power supply. So if you're not sure if you want to, what one you want to use, leave a comment in the description of the video. We can give you some ideas on which ones you should be using. But again, for a low grade and entry level build, this is probably the cheapest I would go. It would be the Corsair CX 430M or one of the CX series. Next thing you'll need to have, well not next, but one of the things you'll need to have is you'll need to have RAM. We have a 4 gig stick of DDR 1600 RAM. This is a cast latency of 9. Now, that's probably not going to matter for most of you. You're probably not going to be too concerned about what cast latency is. Basically, cast latency is the timing it takes for it to be able to actually process whatever memory is being accessed. So this is a pretty quick module of RAM. Typically, if you're looking in the $50 to $100 price range for RAM, and if you ask some people that might know a little bit more about it, they can give you a pretty good idea. But 1600 cast 9 latency, it's good RAM. That's a 4 gig stick. That's really all we're going to need for most things. Most gaming builds are only going to need about 4 to 8 gigs. Additionally, we have our solid state drive. I've been a huge proponent of the solid state drive category. I don't really use HDDs anymore, typical platter hard drives. The reason is because solid state drives are going to give you better performance out the box, and typically they're going to have less issues throughout their lifetime. They're a little bit more durable. Now they do have some issues with eventually they're going to fade out over 4 or 5 years. They're going to start being worse and worse and worse, and you'll have to replace it. But the same thing's going to happen with a typical platter hard drive. You're going to get issues with magnetic stripping. You're going to have problems with it lasting more than a few years anyway. So a solid state drive is way faster, and this is a 240 gig one that only cost us around $80. They're really cheap now, and I don't see why anybody in the world would recommend a hard drive over a solid state drive unless you're going to be storing, loads and loads of videos and music. You'll also need a graphic card. You don't really need this in every single build. This is a GTX 670. This is an older graphic card that we have our hands on. We're actually going to be putting a 970 into this system to show you guys some of how it can work. But it doesn't matter. This is actually a pretty decent graphic card. It's going to run most modern games at high settings. So we're only doing the graphic card to kind of beef up our gaming performance. If you don't want a gaming computer and you just want it to be strong and fast, just skip the graphic card. Next thing that's an optional piece that you don't really need to have is a CD drive. We have an optical DVD, CD drive, a DVD burner, whatever. It costs about $16, and most cases actually have slots for them. So I don't really see a reason not to get it because a lot of people still use CDs, DVDs, whatever else. And it's not a bad way to be able to access some of your media or even store some of your media. So I usually recommend it because at under 20 bucks, you can't really go wrong with the extra piece of hardware in your computer, especially when most cases actually have a space built for it. Last thing that you'll need to have some sort of tools. This is a really cheap set from iWork. It cost me $8. I got it from Micro Center. You can find something like this on Newegg, Amazon, wherever else. Typically, you can actually use just a regular tool set with bigger screwdrivers, but you might want to get something a little bit more precise for those smaller pieces in your computer. So we're going to be showing you guys how to put all of this into here and then turn this on and make this work as your brand new computer. And we're going to show you it's really not that difficult to process. All right, so the first thing you're going to want to do is take off the side panels of your case. If it has a back side panel, you want to take that one off as well. I call it the back even though it's the other side. It's the right side when you're looking straight up on it. But this side you're going to want to have access to so you can do your cable management. You can make sure that everything is in there properly. You'll also want to remove any sort of bay blocks in the front. Typically they're going to be covered to give it the nice aesthetic appeal, but we want this uncovered so we can stick in our CD, DVD, Blu-ray drive, whatever it is we're putting in there. So make sure it's all uncovered so you can see through it like this, and then you can actually start putting the stuff into your computer and not have to worry about taking something apart later on. This usually takes just a few seconds. The next thing you're going to want to do is make sure that you have the appropriate mounting screws in the proper holes for your case and your motherboard combination. In our case, we have a micro ATX motherboard, and this is a micro ATX case, so the screw holes aren't going to be that hard to figure out. But you can grab your motherboard, you can actually stick it right over, and you can see exactly where you should be placing the screws. Now, they're going to look hexagonal. They're little small mounting screws that stick up just a little bit. And you're going to be using these screws, again, to give some clearance for your motherboard so it's not grounding out on your case. There is a little tool that it comes included in your bag of goodies that they give you for the case. And you want to make sure that this tool is being used to tighten it. It has grooves on the back for a Phillips head screwdriver, and that's going to have a hexagonal tip so you can actually get in there and you can crank it nice and tight. You don't want to be too tight because you don't want to damage the PCB on your motherboard, but you want it to be tight enough so it's not going to be loose and wiggling around in there. Once we have our screws installed, we have one here, one here, one here, one here, if I can get my finger on it, there we go, over here, and one down here, and one down here. Total of 6 screws for a micro ATX. Sometimes in ATX or extended ATX, you're going to get 9, even 12 different screws you're going to screw in. You do want to screw all of them in. These actually serve as grounding for your motherboard. It's going to prevent electric shock on them. So do make sure you put all these screws in. Once you have all those ready to go, it's time to install your motherboard. Now, in some cases, you're not going to want to install the motherboard first. You might want to install the power supply or the CD, DVD drive. But in this case, with this motherboard, we have ample room to install our motherboard first. So we're going to go ahead and do that and show you guys how it looks once it's in. It's really simple. You're going to want to make sure that these back ports are going to line up on the back of your case. Your motherboard will have come with a case cover. This is going to go on the back. It's going to pop in. They all are the same. Every case has the same standard to fit these case covers to go and basically serve as some protection for the actual motherboard itself, since these are going to be slightly different alignments in different motherboards. So you stick this in first, it pops right into place, make sure the outside is facing out, and then you're going to stick your motherboard in and make sure it's aligned with these screws, screw it in nice and tight. We're going to go ahead and show you that once it's completed. Once you have the motherboard secured, again, you want to make sure you have all of the different mounting screws screwed in. You can tell which ones are mounting slots because they're actually going to have a little bit of metal surrounding them. Again, that's because they're actually grounding screws. So want to make sure that all those are in there nice and firm and secure. Once that's in there, you can also see on the back plate, it's on nice and easy. It literally just pops into place. Now we can focus on putting in our CPU. The CPU is going to fit right here in the middle of the motherboard. Some of you may prefer or opt to put in your CPU before you actually stick your motherboard into your case, depending on what type of CPU you have. I know that AMD CPUs are typically easier to put in before you put them into the case because of the pins that are on the CPU. We're going to do it like this, seeing as how the case that we have was actually built for you to put everything in after you have the motherboard mounted. And this is also going to be something that you want to take into account when you're actually using an aftermarket heatsink. You'll typically want to have it in the case first because they can be super bulky and make it really hard to maneuver. So we're going to go ahead and install the CPU now, and we're going to show you how to actually do that. When you're installing your CPU, there's going to be a couple of things you want to pay attention to. First off, your CPU itself is going to be in a different packaging than your heatsink. We're going to use the Intel provided heatsink because we're not planning on doing a whole lot of overclocking. When you're actually installing it, as far as an Intel CPU is concerned, there's a nice little bracket that you're going to basically pull to the side here, and that allows you to lift up this portion of it. And you just pull up the bracket part, and it pulls it up with it. And when you're installing the CPU, if you look very closely on the CPU, there's actually a little arrow in the top left corner. That arrow is going to match up with whatever arrow is on the bracket on your actual motherboard. So we're going to go ahead and stick that in there properly. Now, when you're mounting and you have the case actually standing up, when you're looking at the case, it's always going to be in the bottom left-hand corner. That's where Intel always puts their arrow. You need this arrow to match up or else your pins aren't going to be matched up properly and you're going to fry your motherboard and potentially damage your CPU as well. So, again, really simple. You're going to lift up this bracket. We can see the arrow that's matching right here on the motherboard. So we're going to match it up in the bottom left. We're doing our best not to bend any pins on the motherboard. Some of you may know some of the horror stories of tech. If you bend any pins, you're going to be in a lot of trouble trying to get your stuff replaced. So, once it's in there, it's firmly seated. We're going to then close this bracket, like so. And again, This nice little metal part right here is just going to link around, and it's going to provide some negative pressure to push down this top part. Once that's in place, now we're ready and we're prepared to put on our heatsink. Make sure if you're using the stock Intel heatsink, you unwind it a little bit. They're really tightly wound, and actually they're so tightly wound that you can have the fan be stopped by the cord just by the wrapping that it comes stock. So be aware of that. When you're putting in the CPU in the heatsink, you don't want to touch the surface of the CPU because it gets oils from your fingers on the top of it and fingerprints, which reduces your cooling ability. Additionally, you don't want to touch the bottom of the heatsink. As you can see on the heatsink, there is going to be some thermal paste that's going to be coming with this actual heatsink. Most of them don't come with a thermal paste. Intel includes it. And you don't want to touch either of these because it can affect the cooling in your system. It's not going to be crucial, it's not going to kill it, but you do want to be careful. One thing I didn't mention as well, when you're putting in your CPU, you want to make sure that you're grounded first. Oh, how do you get grounded when you're putting in your motherboard and your CPU? Really simple, just touch your case. If your case is metal, it's going to get any sort of electric shock out, and you're going to be totally fine. They sell stupid bracelets and stupid anti-static whatevers. I've built literally hundreds of computers. I've never used one of those. I've always grounded myself by touching the case, and I've never fried any component I've ever put in a computer. Really simple, just make sure you're grounded when you're messing with electric parts. When you're sticking the CPU heatsink on, orientation as far as the stock Intel ones, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter if it's upside down, the logo can be right side up. We're fortunate enough that the CPU fan header is below the actual processor, so we can stick it right side up for aesthetic value, but it doesn't really matter what orientation you have it in. When you're sticking it in, there's going to be 4 points of contact, one here, one here, one here, and one here on the corners. You're going to match these 4 points of contact with the same ones that are above, or excuse me, to the corners of the CPU itself. And you're going to find them again right on your motherboard. They're little holes that shine through. So we're going to go ahead and install this. Now, as you can see, as it's going in, there's these corner, basically just buttons. You're just going to snap them down. And it's going to snap through, and you can actually see on the back of your case, a little black part pushes through a clear plastic and expands the clear plastic to give you basically an anchor like you'd use in a drywall anchor. So you're going to push it through, and it comes through nice and easy. Now we have to make sure that this part, which is our actual fan control, is hooked up to the motherboard. In your motherboard, you're going to find one, there's typically only one, sometimes there's two, but typically there's only one header that has 4 pins included, and the 4 tiny pins underneath it, it's going to say in very small letters, CPU fan. You can also look in your motherboard's handbook or the instruction manual, and that's going to tell you exactly which header to look at. But again, this one is really simple. It's right below the heatsink itself, so we're going to go ahead and plug that in as well. Once we have the CPU and the heatsink installed, make sure you give your fan a nice little spin. Make sure it's actually moving. I did have a build one time that I went and helped a friend with, and we found out that the fan wasn't moving because, again, it can be pretty taut with the wire here. Make sure that's all good. The next thing we're going to install in this case, again, this is going to be different depending on what case you're using. We're going to put in our CD DVD drive here into the front of the case. Now this is really simple. It's really not as complicated as you would think. You're literally going to stick it in just like this in the front and push it through, and you're going to match up some screw holes. Now, you can see it fairly well there on the video. You're just going to match up these little screw holes here. There's 4 of them on one side, 4 on the other side. Now, some people are going to be sticklers about this. I don't care. I only put 4 screws in because typically I don't want to have to access the back panel once I have all the cable management done. I want it to be just the way it is. And so I only do the front panel so I can access it and I can take it out if I need to. So we're going to go ahead and stick those in. Remember when I mentioned the different types of screws? This is when we want to use the small threaded screws to screw in the actual CD DVD drive. Keep in mind, it may actually have come with some screws, but the ones that are included with your case are going to be the same screws, and they're going to match the aesthetic, whether it's black, silver, white, whatever. Typically, the screws are going to match the aesthetic. So we're going to go ahead and stick those in now. The next piece of hardware we're going to stick into our computer is our power supply unit. The nice thing about this case, it's a top-mounted power supply unit, so you don't have to worry about how long your actual CPU power connector is. Keep in mind, with this case in particular, we're not really going to worry about that with some cases because of how long they are, you're going to want to make sure that your power supply accommodates the cable length that you need to get from point A to point B. Typically, the longest connection that's going to be taking place is your CPU power. So read the reviews, go ahead and look on the websites, whatever you need to, make sure that you have a long enough cable to get from wherever your power supply sits in your case to where it's actually going to be on the motherboard. Most of them are going to be just fine, especially if you're going with Corsair. They typically have a little bit longer length of their cables. So we're going to go ahead and install that now. It's a top-mounted PSU, power supply unit. And again, we can use the screws that are included with the case, or we can use the screws that actually came with the power supply unit. They're both black, so it doesn't really matter. We're going to show you how that fits in. So as you can see, as we're sticking in this power supply, because most computers are now, most cases anyway, are now bottom mounted, the fan's actually going to be facing down. We want it to be facing the place where it can be ventilated, and there's no top vents on here. And so your power supply is going to appear to be upside down. It doesn't matter what orientation it's in, just stick it in there the way it's supposed to be fitting, which again is with the fan having the proper ventilation. And as we lift it up, again, when you're building a computer, you typically want to have the case on its side, but for you guys, we're doing it really difficult and having it standing up. It should fit into some brackets and actually sit pretty nice without any screws. You need to screw it in still, but it actually fits pretty nice in there. On the back, there's going to be 4 points that we need to be screwing in your actual power supply. The screw holes are going to be evident on your power supply. Different power supplies have different screw points, and different cases have different availability for them. It's kind of a pain. It should really be more of a standard. However, you just match it up to whatever it looks like it's going to fit in, and some of this may be seeming like a little bit of jimmy rigging, but just match it up the best you can and make sure that your power supply is secure. Again, all it needs is just the 4 screws to really be secured in there. Because of the way that manufacturers actually build their cases with stamped steel and the way that different power supplies are made, you are going to have some inconsistencies. You might have to manhandle the metal a little bit. Don't be afraid to use a little bit of force. Again, your power supply, your case, they're not really going to be too offended if you use a little bit of muscle in them. You don't want to do that with PCBs, your motherboard being a PCB, but with the power supply, you can kind of manhandle it into where you need to fit the screws. The next thing we're going to want to install is our solid state drive. This is a PNY solid state drive. It's their budget entry level. Really honestly, unless you're doing some pretty serious computing, you're not going to notice the difference between speeds in most solid state drives. This one is 240 gigs. Again, it costs around $80 to $90. Very cheap, very nice option, and it'll probably last you a good few years. With this case, most cases are now coming with specific solid state drive mounts. This is a budget level case, so it does only have one mount for a solid state drive. That's at the bottom. So we're going to show you guys how to mount it onto this case. Keep in mind though, sometimes you're actually going to have the mounts in the actual hard drive bays, and they're going to be separate brackets for those. But again, this is going to be right on the bottom of the case, and we're going to show you how it screws in real quick. As you're screwing in a solid state drive, on the bottom, there's going to be 4 different screws when you're bottom mounting it. So we're going to be using each one of these contacts to screw into the bottom. If you're screwing it into a hard drive bay, something that's actually accommodating this small form factor, you're actually going to have the side screws that you're using. There's 4, there's 2 on each side. So keep that in mind. That's where the mounts are actually going to be going. You want to make sure that you always have enough clearance for both your power SATA and your actual data SATA. And we're going to cover what that is in a second. All right, so what you're going to be doing is you're going to try and match up the screw holes on the bottom with the bottom of your solid state drive. So we're going to loosely fit all of these screws in. We have our solid state drive mounted down here at the bottom. We have access to our SATA power and SATA data underneath it, and it's a nice place to put it so it doesn't actually obstruct anything in your case. The next thing we're going to want to install is our RAM. We only have 1 stick of RAM, but most motherboards are going to accommodate up to 4 sticks of RAM. So we're going to go ahead and stick this in. Most of the time, the best slot to put it in if you're only having 1 stick of RAM is your first slot. So you may want to consult your motherboard's manual. It'll tell you what the preferred slots are. It also tells you what slots you need to have for dual channel RAM. We're not going to be running dual channel RAM, so we're just putting it in the first slot, which is the correct slot to put in a single slot of RAM. Now, I know some of you use aftermarket coolers. If you're using an aftermarket cooler, you want your RAM in first, because then you can actually figure out the clearance that you're going to need for your cooler. Since we don't have an aftermarket cooler, everything fits nice and snug. The only thing we have to worry about when installing the RAM is you can see right here there's a little notch in the middle. It's not really the middle though, there's actually less space on one side and more on the other. That's the only thing that matters when you're installing your RAM. Make sure that the less space is on the top and that it matches whatever the layout is on your actual motherboard. When you're putting it into the RAM slots, you're going to see the same groove sticking out, and that's going to indicate whether or not it's properly positioned. Once you have it in, RAM is really tough. You're going to need to put some pressure on it, more than you think is necessary, and it's probably going to scare you. That's okay. You're not going to hurt it. You're not going to hurt its feelings. The easiest way to put it in is make sure that the top is aligned properly, or the bottom, whichever one you prefer to work with. Make sure that's aligned properly so you can kind of get a swinging motion like I'm doing right now. And then push in the bottom until it snaps. And again, you may have to put more than you think is necessary. There it goes. Just snapped. And we'll make sure the top is also pushed in until it snaps. And what should eventually happen is these little tags up here should go down over your RAM. And they should do that based purely on the pressure that you've applied to it. Make sure it's in there nice and snug. And again, you're going to need to push this probably harder than you think. You're not going to break anything, I promise. Every computer needs a little bit of love. And for our next trick, we're going to go ahead and install the actual graphic card itself, the GPU. Make sure that before you install the graphics card, everything is getting put in. Make sure that you do remove the proper channels that need to be removed here. I'm going to stick my hand through so you can actually see it. We need to make sure that we have the proper space to put our graphic card mount in. So make sure that's cut out, and we're going to go ahead and stick it in. You're going to be matching the bracket on the back, which you can see here, with the actual mounting places on the case. So it's really pretty nice. This part right here, these two little juts are going to go right past the motherboard, and they're going to stick into basically the back part of the case. So keep in mind, this is going to fit past your motherboard, and then this is going to screw onto the mounting bracket. You want to make sure that both of these are screwed in properly. So let's go ahead and stick it in there. This is a large PCI Express connector, so you want to make sure it's in a large PCI Express lane. Some motherboards have different PCI Express lanes. If you look at the support or the manual, it's going to tell you which ones have a 16x speed. You always want to put your graphic card into the 16x speed if you can. And as we kind of finagle it, because the card is seemingly wider than the case, but it's not, we're going to make sure that it's all in there properly before we jut it in. Okay. Once it's properly aligned, make sure it is properly aligned. You're going to have to use some more love like you did with the RAM. And you're going to push it pretty tight, and it'll actually lock into place. PCI Express has actually a little lock on the edge of the graphic card that kind of hooks around a little nook in it. So once it's in there right, make sure it locks. That's going to provide it enough basically standing pressure to make sure it doesn't wobble around. Then you're going to want to secure it with the two screws on the side. Most graphic cards come with it. Your case also came with it, so we're just going to use the ones included with the case. For the next portion, we're going to start plugging everything in. Now, this can be rather tedious. We're not going to go into a huge amount of detail with this. We're going to focus on some of the more important connections, though. Your PCI connections, your CPU headers. So let's get the CPU one plugged in first. We'll show you how that works. So make sure that you have the proper alignment here. The snap is going to be really nice because this is actually going to tell you which alignment is proper. So this is going to show us that the snap needs to be on top of these, and the snap on our motherboard is on top as well. So make sure it's aligned properly, and then go ahead and stick that into that slot. You're going to have to use some force, more than you think is necessary. Again, computers need love. So give it a little bit of force as you're sticking this in. Make sure it's in tight, because again, this is providing power to your CPU. You don't want any loose sockets as you're doing that, because that can screw up your actual processor. So once that's in and in there tight, we can start working on some of the other cables. The next cable I want to focus on really quick is your power cable. This is your central power cable to your motherboard. It has a lot of pins, 24 pins, and it's going to seem really intimidating, but it's really easy. There's only one spot this fits on the motherboard, so it's really easy to find. It's the big one. It's usually on the side, right here, right next to typically the open port or the open area next to your motherboard where you can access the back. So it's right here. Make sure again that the top clip is fitting with the clip on the side of the power. So for that, we're going to have to bend it. It's okay to bend these, just make sure you're trying not to bend them too close to the actual connections themselves. Once we have those in there, we can start working a little bit on our cable management, make sure that's out of the way. You don't need to do too much with it. Some people like to thread through the different brackets that are on the back of their case. I don't. I like to have it nice and messy in the back of the case because it allows me to actually mess with things, but you can do it how you like. The next cable that we're going to be working with is our PCI Express cable. Now it's very nice, most power supplies have it actually labeled PCI-E, that's PCI Express, so make sure you're having the correct one. You're going to stick one of the headers, the 4-port header, into the actual power supply. Sometimes it's different, but usually it's 4 ports. And you're going to stick it wherever it says PCI Express. Once we have it in our power supply, we can then route it down around the back and make sure that your PCI power right here is being satisfied. Typically it's right on the front facing one of the side panels. Sometimes it's actually going to be facing the front of the case, so it'll be more here in this area. But most graphic cards, because of the length they have now, are going to be sticking it towards the side panel. So make sure again that matches up with whatever the clamp is. Again, the clamp is going to be down in this scenario, so we're going to make sure that that is in the down position. Now, because of the nature of this power supply, it is cheaper, less expensive. We're going to have to use a Molex, which is this little 4-pin connector thing, these two 4-pin connectors, Molex to PCI Express. Some enthusiasts out there are going to be shaking their heads saying, what? Don't do that. This doesn't matter. It's not really going to affect the power. You don't want to overclock your graphic card on a Molex connection, but these are made and they come with your graphic card for a reason. They're not going to break your computer. So you can then use these two Molex connections, and we're going to show you that, to plug in the additional PCI Express connector. Okay, so now we have our Molex plugged into our power supply. We're going to then take the Molex connections and we're going to be plugging them in to our PCI Express adapter. Nice and easy pushing those in. Again, you're going to use more force than what you would normally think is necessary on a computer. And make sure that they're aligned properly. Sometimes these Molex connections can get a little bit weird in the actual female end. They get kind of bent, the pins do. You can bend them back with your finger or a screwdriver. Once we have that there, it's going to create a nice little Y connection like that. We're then going to plug in our PCI Express. Okay, so once we have the power connections in properly, these are all the most important power connections, the dedicated power connections, and we can start working on some of the SATA connections. The next thing we need to worry about is providing power and data to our CD/DVD drive and our solid-state drive or hard drive if you have those as well. So we're going to use our 90-degree angled SATA cable for our CD/DVD drive because it won't work on our solid-state drive. It's really simple. There's only 2 slots for SATA connections. They're right next to each other. One is for data and the other one is for power. The smaller one is for data and the bigger one is for power. And again, that first one is angled at a 90-degree angle as well. Now we have power and data coming in. It's going to be a little bit difficult to see. I'll get my finger here to kind of illustrate. The first one is our data. It's the smaller one. And our power is literally right next to it. And it's clamped in to give us the power. Same thing's going to happen with our solid-state drive. It's at the bottom of the case. We're going to skip that for you. But just make sure that you plug that in the same way you're doing this. Once we have our SATA connection in the actual CD/DVD drive and our solid-state drive or hard drive, we need to plug it into the motherboard. Some motherboards are going to have different types of SATA connections, but most of the time now they're pretty much universal. So it doesn't really matter which one you're plugging it into. We're going to plug it into the side here. And again, the only thing you have to worry about is that that L shape matches up with the L shape on the actual motherboard itself. So we stick it on there, it snaps into place, and then you have a nice connection with SATA. So we're going to go ahead and move it over here a little bit so you can actually see it. All right, so it just snaps into those little ports right there. And once you have it on there, you should have data and power now going to your actual drives. Okay, the next thing you're going to want to worry about is dealing with these smaller connections that are going to go along the bottom of your motherboard itself. Now, you may want to put these in before you put in your graphic card. You may want to do them after. For the sake of this video, we're just going to do it after really quick. but there's little connections for every one of these. Now, this is our USB 3.0. This is actually going to connect right underneath our power right here, as you can see. So we're going to get that plugged in first, and then we're going to plug in our HD audio. Some connections do have USB 2.0. That's going to connect down here at the bottom as well. And then we're going to plug in our power switch. We're going to show you how that actually works. Okay, so we got our USB 3.0 plugged in here. That's going to power our front USB ports. Now we're going to mess with the HD audio. The HD audio is usually found, if you're looking directly at your motherboard, in the bottom left of the motherboard. Keep in mind there is one pin that is blanked here. That's going to show you what orientation is proper. Make sure you align it properly with the blanked pin, matching the blanked pin on your motherboard so you don't jack anything up. We have a chassis fan header that we need to be sticking into the actual motherboard. So for the chassis, we're going to make sure this is plugged in. When you're looking at the motherboard itself, you'll see a nice little CHA fan 1. That means it's chassis fan 1. We're going to go ahead and stick this into that slot. And last but certainly not least, we need to make sure that our power switch connectors are put in properly. So you're going to notice here it says power switch, reset switch, it says power LED minus and plus, as well as HDD LED. These are going to show up on the front of your case with different lights, and the different buttons are going to be operated. Now, you're going to want to consult with the manual for your motherboard so that you can more easily see the diagram. These all fit individually into a bunch of little pins that are right below the graphic card. It's going to be pretty hard to get the proper alignment if you don't know exactly how to do it and you've never done it before. Just consult the manual. It's pretty easy. If it doesn't turn on, try and screw with them a little bit. You're not going to hurt it. Just try and get those in the proper ports the first time by looking in the manual. As you can see, we have our HD audio plugged in. You're going to have different USB headers in case you have more USB ports that need to be plugged in. You also have right here the chassis fan plugged in, and our power, reset, and HD LEDs and switches plugged in right here, right below the graphic card. Most of the time, you're going to get more clearance than this. This is a micro ATX case, which means that you're going to have a little bit less clearance for everything inside of the case. That's okay though, that's normal. But when you have a regular ATX or an extended ATX, you're going to have a lot more room. So now we have everything plugged in. Just make sure that you don't have anything blocking any fans, that your CPU fan can work okay, your CPU fan works, your GPU works, everything is all good. And then you can go ahead and plug it in and actually take it for a test drive. So make sure everything's good, make sure your connections are strong, and then plug in the power cord to the back of the power supply. Make sure it's set to the on position on the switch there, and go ahead and hit your power button, and everything should start up just fine. Alright, now before we finish up and we put together our cable management, we close up the case. What I call cable management is really just jamming the back plate on. We're going to make sure that everything boots up properly so that we can troubleshoot any issues, we can fix any problems. Typically, if there is a problem, just undo every connection and plug it back in and you'll probably be okay. So we're going to go ahead and boot up here. The blue light comes on. You can see our disk drive is reacting nicely, and our monitor now shows that it's turning on. Ass rock. Woohoo! So our BIOS is now booting, and it says put in media device. Well, that's pretty simple. We're going to grab our Windows 8.1 disk. We're going to open up our CD drive, and we're going to stick it in. Now this is going to walk us through a little process of how to actually start installing everything, Windows 8 and everything like that. It's pretty simple. It actually walks you through in really plain English, so I don't think many people are going to have an issue with it. We're still going to show you the splash screen, the install screen, and then we're going to show you how to put the drivers on your computer so that you're not running around with no connectivity or ability to do anything. So that will load up. From this point, one of the easiest things to do, rather than trying to figure out which function button is going to get you to boot to a different device, just turn the computer off. It'll boot off just by pushing the button. And if you turn it back on, it should actually recognize that there's a disk in there, and it should boot from your disk. We're going to make sure it does that real quick. So we can see we have the BIOS flashing. ASUS is coming up. It's all happy. We can hear our disk spinning like crazy in there, being read. And It's actually recognizing that the disk is in there and it's loading up Windows 8.1 installation. I'm going to go around to the other side of the desk now. I'm going to show you guys how to actually install it. So you'll notice on the side of our case, it is still empty. All the wires are exposed. We haven't put any coverings over the case, over the computer yet, because we want to make sure that everything is running properly. I usually wait until Windows is installed to finish up my build in case there's any issue. Some issues you won't even notice until it's actually running. So we're going to click Install Now. Really easy. And then it starts the setup process. It then brings up a screen to enter in your product key. We're going to go ahead and just skip past this part so you don't see our product key, all you hackers. So again, make sure you accept those terms. There's two different types of installations, an upgrade and a custom. When you're installing a new version of Windows, you need to do the custom, install Windows only, because we don't have any other files, settings, applications. If we click this, it's going to prompt us to leave the installer and you have to start over. So we're going to click on custom. It then says, oh, here's our drive. There's nothing on it. Do you want to use this? We can definitely do that. So we're going to click next, and it's going to start the installation process. When you have an SSD, this goes pretty quick. If you have a standard hard drive, it'll probably take about 10 minutes, maybe 15, depending on the speed of it. But this will go pretty fast, and then the computer will restart a couple times, and we'll show you the next part of this once this is all done, so you don't have to watch all this text. All right, once it finishes installing Windows, you're going to see that it's now going to load up Windows itself. It's going to take you to the splash screen, the startup screen for Windows 8.1, so you can start personalizing your computer. We're going to do pink because I know how much you all love pink, and we're going to put in whatever PC name we want. All right, now it's going to give you some settings. You can choose to customize the settings, which I would do if I were you, and you can have it automatically install important updates and recommended updates, or you can have it so it's not set up or just the important ones. Since this is for somebody else, we're going to be building it and putting on recommended updates. It's really not that big of an issue or pain in our butt, excuse me. Automatically updates apps, we're going to leave on. Automatically get drivers, apps, and new info for new devices. Absolutely, we're going to keep that on. We're going to not worry about all the things they have with Internet Explorer because we don't use Internet Explorer. So we're going to leave those on. You can see here it allows you to check for error reporting. You should leave this on. Windows actually does a pretty good job at fixing a lot of issues through error reporting. We're going to keep the compatibility list in Internet Explorer because, again, we're not going to use that. We have some options here to send our location data to Microsoft, show them some of our usage scenarios, and some information about how we use help. By default, these are all off, which is actually really nice. We appreciate that from Microsoft. You can turn these on if you'd like. You don't have to. I'm going to leave them off because, well, we're just going to leave them off. Click Next. Now we have some information with Bing, Internet Explorer, different apps. We're just going to leave all these on by default, but you can obviously read them as you're installing it. Now you put in your username. You also want to add a password to this. It's kind of weird that they have this portion showing up in this bit of the installation, because you can have a Microsoft account, but it doesn't immediately ask you for your Microsoft account. So you have to set a username first and then put in your Microsoft account information. So we're just going to put in whatever information we want. We're going to do, we'll do Todd, and we'll do no password, and we'll finish. And then our computer tells us hello. So now we're booted to the OS, and you can connect all the cables that you need, your Ethernet, things like that, and download Firefox or Google Chrome and actually, browse the internet. The last thing you'll want to do when this is all completed is put the cover on your case. I already put the back cover on, and we're going to remove the Windows install disk out of here. We're going to put in the motherboard drivers disk. This has all the drivers for the motherboard. It also has Norton and a bunch of other crap you're not going to want to install. We're going to plug it in. We're going to show you how to do that. It takes just a couple of seconds to start the process, and then just like when you're installing Windows, it's going to boot up again and then restart and boot up again and restart. Do all these different things as it's installing these programs like it does when you're installing Windows. We put the disk in, and right up here at the top it says choose what happens to this what happens with this disk, excuse me. We're going to do it down here so you can see in case that notification goes away. you can click this little folder, click on this PC, which it actually launches to this PC, and right here in the middle we have our support CD. We're going to double click it, click yes. In most motherboards you're going to have the option to install all. Now this is a good thing because it installs all the drivers at the same time. It's also a bad thing because it installs Norton and Google Chrome and Google Toolbar and really just a bunch of stuff you probably don't need or you may not want. So we're going to click install all, and now it gives us the option to select which ones we want. Now if you click install all drivers only, it's only going to install the drivers. Yeah, really great, awesome. Wait a second, Norton's not a driver. So you have to make sure you unclick that. It's just stupid. I don't know why they do it. ASRock does it, Asus does it, everyone does it. For some reason, even when you click install only the drivers, they still include the stupid internet security system, whatever, that comes with your motherboard's manufacturer. So really stupid, doesn't matter. Once you have that done, you can check it again to make sure you don't have any bloatware. We don't want their tuning things, we don't want their fast LAN, it's all just a bunch of marketing gimmicks. And we don't also want the Google Toolbar, which I don't believe is a driver either. And we're gonna leave Google Chrome out of this as well. So other than that, that has everything you need, all the drivers you need. And we click OK. Now it's going to start installing the drivers. It's going to tell us at the bottom installing which driver it is. Once the first or couple of them are done, it's going to restart and then continue with the installation. So if you leave a password off initially, it actually makes this a lot simpler so you don't have to use the password each and every time. So keep that in mind. That is kind of a benefit of doing it that way. It's now restarting after the installation of that. Again, it's going to take a little while to finish installing everything, but once this is done, you're good to go. You're good to use your new computer. You have all the drivers that you need installed. If you have a graphic card installed as well, you'll want to make sure that you install the disk, or put in the install disk, excuse me, and install the initial drivers. If it's from NVIDIA, make sure you download NVIDIA GeForce Experience. It actually is very nice, keeps everything up to date. If it's with AMD, make sure you get their software suite. You need the proper drivers for your graphic card. So make sure that's done at the end of it. But other than that, you're pretty much good and ready to go and start playing some video games after you get the proper games installed on your computer. Alright, so once you have everything done, I like to keep all of my manuals, all of the warranty information, the extra cords. I usually keep it in the power supply box because they're really easy to open and it usually fits everything quite nicely. So this is where I usually like to store everything. You can put this in a closet, wherever else, and you can get rid of all the other boxes that are just going to take up space. Now we have our finished computer, finished product. Like I said, you can go on there, you can download different things that you need, different games, things like that. I want to give a shout out to reddit.com/r/buildapc. If you go on there, watch this video, try and put together your computer. If you're having any issues, any troubleshooting problems, they are so helpful in making sure that you have all your questions answered, making sure that you can build the computer that you need to build and you can get past the issues that you're having. Additionally, if you go to pcpartpicker.com, there is a nice format for you to be able to add all of the different products that you're buying from different vendors, Amazon, NCIX, Newegg, whatever else, and you can put it all together, make sure it's all compatible, and then you can actually make your final purchase. Links to all of the products that we used in the building of this computer are in the description, so if you want to build this particular gaming rig, again, it's an entry-level gaming rig that has a very high-end processor and high-end graphic card in it. You can definitely do that. We're also going to include links to r/buildapc as well as pcpartpicker.com. So you can make sure that you can navigate to those if you have any other questions about how to build your computer. Additionally, obviously, you can leave a comment for us. We're here to help you, so if you have any issues, you're concerned about what you should do in your build, or what graphic card you should pick, what AMD or Intel, whatever else, go ahead and feel free to leave a comment. We'll be happy to respond, as well as our community will be glad to help you as well. Like this video if you liked it. Comment if you have any questions, suggestions, issues, anything like that. Make sure you click that subscribe button so you can see more videos like this from Gus Tech. The only things that we didn't include in this build are the mouse, the keyboard, some sort of audio either through headphones or speakers, and a monitor. Again, you can purchase all those. We do have different reviews of different monitors, some very high-end gaming monitors you can look at. We have some reviews of different mice, and there's a lot of different keyboards out there you can look at as well. We'll include links in the description to different products that we recommend that you can use for your gaming build. We appreciate your support. We are GusTech, and we'll see you next time.